Welcome everybody to the Daniel Batal YouTube channel today. Boy, I am very excited about what we're doing here today. There's a guy coming on who I was just talking to him backstage. He reached out to me a year ago when I had first started doing DaVinci Resolve tutorials, and just out of the blue reached out, emailed me and said, hey, you know, I love what you're doing. You know, we should hop on a chat and have virtual coffee sometime. Had a great chat, really wonderful guy. I love his content, and apparently I made him wait a year before I got back to him again, because that's the kind of person I am. So without too much further ado here, I think a lot of you guys know who this is. You've seen his content on YouTube. He is one of the guys who really helps demystify the Fusion page in DaVinci Resolve. He's one of the guys that I watch a lot because he simplifies really complex ideas and makes them digestible. And he's been doing this for a while. And I am very honored to have him here with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, the great
Casey Faris, king of the Fusion page.
There he is, ladies and gentlemen,
I was
Casey
not
Faris.
prepared for the jingle at all.
Hey, man,
At all.
thank you so much for being here today. It is such an honor to have you here with us. I have said there's a handful of educators out there. When I moved over to Fusion and started learning Fusion, the only person I knew who used Fusion was my pal Jay Littman, who was very kind enough to kind of help me with some of the, you know, getting used to it, coming on, showing some of the community how the software worked. But it's such an immense software.
Yeah.
That it's been really great to have different people in the space. I think we talked earlier, you know, Mr. Alex Tech has come on, Jay has been on, we had Darren Mawson come on, talk about color. And it's, and I think sometimes people don't realize that the software really is like 4 different pro level softwares put into one. And the idea of trying to learn it all at once can be so overwhelming.
Yeah.
That I'm hoping that we can bring a little clarity to just one of the pages and maybe make it a little less scary than it is. But first of all, I want to let you tell people who you are and what it is you do here on YouTube.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been doing YouTube for, gosh, probably like, what was it? I mean, oh boy, so long, like 15 years or something, but maybe more than that. I don't know. But yeah, I started doing YouTube because I would watch tutorials and people would just ramble on and talk about stuff that I didn't care about, and they wouldn't ever show anything. And I was just like, man, I feel like I could do a better job with that, and would just get on and try to explain things. And eventually they kind of started taking off and getting shared on some things, and the channel grew. And yeah, so now fast forward a bunch of years, and I work with my best friends, and we make videos, make short films, and make tutorials and training on how to make those in DaVinci Resolve. And pretty recently I've started just really pushing Fusion stuff and kind of specializing in working with Fusion and making Fusion more accessible and helpful, you know, helpful tutorials to get people actually using things, because I really believe that being creative is one of the most important things in life, and the more creativity we can inspire and encourage in the world, the better the world's going to be.
Amen. Amen, brother. You know what you know what I love about your content is not only do I think you have a great pacing, I like pacing and flow and the way that you teach. I have always said that one of the hardest things about teaching things like video editing is creators don't always know how they're supposed to learn. Like learning how to learn is its own ecosystem. And a lot of times what happens is I ran into the same thing. Like a lot of times I pulled up stuff on YouTube because there's a lot of people making DaVinci Resolve tutorials. And some of it was like, oh my gosh, I'm 3 minutes into the video and I feel like I'm completely lost. Like I do not have a solid foundation to get to the point where they're talking about things. Like, I don't know how they got here. I'm staring at this and I'm like, they lost me a minute and a half in, and they're only 3 minutes into like a 40-minute video. Yeah. I'm like, this is going to be horrible. You always seem to have a very relaxed flow. You do a thing that I love is your real personality is in your content. My favorite thing, and anyone who knows me who's been a follower of this channel, like I will stop in the middle of a video and I'll crack myself up just because
Yeah.
something is really funny to me. And I'm sitting all alone and it's like, it ends up in the video because it was really funny to me at the time. And I've watched you do that repeatedly. And to me, that's a sign, someone who can laugh at themselves while trying to be, talk about a serious subject, I think that's the sign to me of a great educator. That you don't take it so seriously that you're not allowed to laugh along the way and have fun with it.
That's the thing, is this stuff is not that serious. I mean, you get in certain circles and you get people who are, trying to gatekeep or whatever, or really trying to be, just take it really seriously. And like, there's a part of that I understand. It's like, there's a craft to this. There's a science to some of this where, you want to do things the right way. You don't want to teach people the wrong thing. You don't want to lead people astray. Right. But at the same time, like the most, like, think about the most serious version of like video production. It's like, all right, you're on a tight deadline. It's for a really big budget. It's for a company that, is going to go, it's going to have a huge audience, right? That's like the most serious scenario. And at the end, you're still making a movie. You're still making a video of some kind for people to watch and enjoy, or at least to like, inspire them or inform them, right? Like, you're not performing heart surgery. You're not, like, nobody's going to die if you mess this up. And so it always blows my mind when people take things so seriously. And I'm like, worst case is I say the wrong thing, or I tell you to do it this way and it messes up your video. And it's like, it's a video. Yeah. We're making movies. This should be fun.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, when we're not having fun, it's like, I don't know. I don't really know if I want to do it if it's not fun,
Well, I have to ask you, like, when I first started using Resolve, most of the other video editing software I've ever used, and I've used a bunch of different ones. I actually cut my teeth on an older product called Lightworks. It was, it's not really in fashion anymore, but it was one of the ones that a lot of major motion pictures back in the day were, editing on Lightworks. And I spent a little time with Blender and realized I'm in over my head trying to learn compositing. I spent a lot of time with Movavi, Filmora, smaller softwares that I went, I'm going to stick with something that's a little more digestible. Then you come to Resolve and it's like pages of different UIs, which is kind of different. Like, I think Adobe users are like, yeah, when I'm in, when I'm in the Adobe ecosystem, there's one software called Premiere Pro. Then there's another software called After Effects.
Yeah.
And, there's different products. They have different products that work in the ecosystem that you can jump between. And Resolve is one that has, it started off as, basically a color correction tool, and then it brought in the editing page, and then it brought in Fusion and a complete digital audio workstation. So you've got these pages of full-on integrated pro level softwares. And one of the things, I had a comment the other day, someone said to me, hey Daniel, could you make a video that covers all the features and what they do in the Fusion page, or if you haven't made one, can you point me towards one? And I kind of felt like that's like asking me, hey, could you tell me exactly all of the pieces, bolts, nuts, parts of how to build a BMW and what each part does, so that I can learn to drive. And it's like you don't need to know all that to start editing in Resolve. You don't need to know what every feature does, because if you literally had to sit and learn every one before you started using it, I don't think you'd ever start using it.
That's the thing that drives me nuts about some tutorials. And that, like I was saying, that's why I started doing tutorials, is because, you watch a tutorial and they'll walk through every single menu item. And it's like, that's cool. I appreciate you being detailed, but 90% of this doesn't matter, and you don't need to know it right now. And so that can be like, okay, we're going to talk about this for an hour before you jump in, and you don't need to know that stuff. I like starting with the minimum, just the minimum stuff, and that's the thing, is like, it can also just keep you stuck as somebody who's learning software. It's like, oh, I got to learn all the little parts first before I get started, when really what you need to do is get started.
Yes. Yeah, man, you said it much better than I did as I trip over my tongue. And I think that's just it. I have to say thanks for the $10 super chat from Byron Brightman, who said, hey, guys, would love to know if you would take a crack at making shot tracers like they do in golf videos, handheld with a line that tapers. One of the things we're going to try to do today is not go down the rabbit hole of that. That could be a whole live stream, just showing how to set up and do shot tracers. And Byron, I appreciate that super chat, and I'm going to make sure that I do cover that in one of my videos coming up. But today, I really want to make sure that what we're doing here is really making it a little easier and a little more digestible and palatable for people to open up Fusion, to start understanding how it works. And yes, we're going to go as deep as you guys, want to go, but I want to make sure the things we cover are useful for people who aren't just trying to do one thing. The goal here today, I really want to try to see if we can make people who are nervous or worried or confused about Fusion have a little more confidence when they open the Fusion page up. Does that make sense? That sound good, guys? So listen, in the chat, tell me right now, how many of you, by thumbs up, if you feel like you open up Fusion and a lot of the nodes are confusing and a lot of the way the design and the layout is in Fusion, if that's confusing, give me a thumbs up and tell me it's confusing. If you think it's not confusing, tell me you got it. Just guys, I got it, no problem. But for me, I
talk about something else then.
Yeah, we can talk about cars, motorcycles. But one of the things when I first opened up Fusion, it took me a while to start really understanding nodes. And it was funny because I was sitting there playing with it, I'm trying to figure it out, and I come from like the layer based background, and it hit me one day while I was playing guitar and I had a pedal board in front of me. I'm like, this is exactly like guitar pedals. It's signal flow. It's, that media in one and the media out. It's like guitar and amp. And then it's just signal flow. And anybody who's dealt with like higher end guitar gear, where you start splitting signals and having like, well, I'm going to go stereo amps and I'm going to have the distortion, come in before the reverb, but split back out to a dry signal that I'm going to re-mic. You start understanding that when you're playing with just a single signal flow and you start branching off and making that guitar sound do a lot more than just what it's doing coming from the guitar. It started making sense to me that way. I think you had a great video where you talked about it more like toast and adding butter and broke it down that way. And as always, I think all of us learn the way we learn. So as a guy who, was a professional musician, I'm like, oh, it's a guitar pedal. It's a guitar.
I think it's so helpful to think of things in metaphors, right? If it's something that that you can use as a metaphor, then what's funny is like you already kind of know how this works if you pick the right metaphor, and then you can kind of explore like, well, okay, well, if I have a guitar and I put this pedal in between, then it's going to change the signal, right? And it's going to, I don't know that much about guitars, but it's going to change it, and that's exactly the way that an effect works in Fusion. You put it in between on the signal and it changes it, right? And so then you can go and think about like, okay, well, if I wanted to like run that through a splitter so that it could send the signal two places, it's like, well, yeah, you can do that in nodes too. It's pretty cool. I love metaphors, man.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, on your channel, you do it very well. You always seem to put things together in a way that makes a lot of sense and uncomplicate things that can be very complicated. So listen, we get a lot of thumbs up. People are like, that Fusion page, it can be at times. I get some who are like, at times.
Yeah,
there's a lot
times,
of people like
during the day or night.
Yeah, at times. That's Tech Reality says. I mean, at times. And it's what's really funny about Fusion is every time I feel like I've got a handle on it, then you put out a video that starts talking about USDs and stuff, and I'm like, is he talking about the United States dollar? No, he isn't. He's talking about
correct.
3D nodes, but another level of 3D nodes. I actually put a link to your most recent video in the description of this live stream, which after the stream, when you guys have some time, you've got to go check it out, because Casey took a really deep dive into the 3D elements inside of Fusion, and it was a real eye-opener. He built a whole chess set, brought the chess set in, and built a whole, basically 3D reality where there's an entire chess set where you could move the pieces and put them in an AI environment. It was amazing. It was really amazing to see it put together. So But I really want to do this. I want to open up. I want to open up Resolve. I want to have you open it up. I want to open up the Fusion page. I want to just talk to you about how you see Fusion and what it is that you're looking at when you first open it up. And maybe you can help some of us who struggle with Fusion have a little bit of a better understanding of what we're staring at right from when we open it up. And maybe we can simplify it a bit to make it easier for some of the people hearing in the replay.
Yeah, man. I'm here for it. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. All right. Do your thing. Put that horrible piece of junk software up on the screen. And
all right. Okay. Let's see. Let's see here. Okay. So, when you open up Fusion, it's going to look like this. I'm going to go and just turn off my page navigation so we have a little bit more room here. But this is pretty much what you get when you open up Fusion. Now, this is the point where, you know, if you're like most people who have worked with like layers, and you know, if you come from Photoshop or After Effects or something like that, or if you've never even done any compositing, you look at this and you go, wow, I don't know what any of that means, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and close Resolve.
I think that's oftentimes that's the best thing. Just stop and go
just
home.
Stop, just go somewhere else. Yep. But if you're willing to go with me here for a second, this is one of those things. It's almost like looking at the blank page of, you know, like when you're going to draw or when you're going to type or something. It's super intimidating, but it's actually not really that complicated if you're willing to just jump in a little bit here. So that's kind of what I'm going to ask you to do. So first of all, I like to start with just the things that would be familiar. So if you guys are familiar with editing in Resolve, so let's just go back to the edit page. There's some things that are in the edit page that are going to be familiar with Fusion, right? So we have the media pool here. This is where your media lives. We have a couple of viewers. This viewer on the right is what's going to happen, you know, when you drag something to the timeline. This is what the end person who watches your video is going to see this, right? You can double click on stuff and open it here and kind of look at a piece of things before you add it to the timeline, right? You have the timeline, you can move it left and right. You have an inspector where you can select something and you can adjust its properties and zoom it and that kind of thing, right? So all of these things, if you do any kind of video editing, this should feel pretty familiar, right? So if we go into the Fusion page, let me just open if we go into the Fusion page, we actually have quite a bit of those things. So we have this media pool over here, same kind of thing. We have our viewer, which for now, let's say is what the person who watches your video is going to see. And so if you're making something that's green, here's a screen that's green. We also have a viewer here on the left, and we can view different parts of our composition this way, which we'll get into in a minute. But then over here, we have the inspector, and we can select things down here on the bottom, and we can adjust properties of things here in the inspector. And so a big part of this should be pretty familiar, actually. The thing that tends to throw people off is this part down here. The part with the nodes and this toolbar and everything. It looks like there's 100 little buttons, and you're like, I have to learn every little button and figure out what all that does. Are these different tools?
Wait, this is the worst part. Is I thought the same thing, Casey. I thought that was where I was going to be living, and then I started learning them, and then figured out, oh no, that's only some of them.
Yeah.
There are many more.
Yeah, I don't know if it's encouraging or discouraging to tell you how many nodes there are in Fusion, but let's just say, here's the great news. These aren't different ways of working with stuff like they would be on the edit page, where you have these different tools where the one cuts and one selects and that kind of thing. It's not like that. You can almost think of these right here as different effects. Okay, so just like you were going to go to the effects panel and you were going to grab an effect, like you don't know all of the effects in the effects panel on the edit page, right? And that doesn't bother you, right? You have all these generators and effects and stuff. You don't know all of these, but you can still edit, right? So it's kind of the same thing. In Fusion, if you go here, this is just a bunch of stuff you could use. You don't need to worry about it right now. Don't worry about it. What we do need to jump into is what the heck are nodes? This is the big thing. This is universally the thing that keeps people away from Fusion. You hear something, oh, it's an integrated compositor. You can make visual effects, you can make graphics, you can make animations, you can make cartoons, you can clone things like Photoshop, you can do color, some color matching, you can blur things, you can track, you can do 3D, you can do all this stuff, and you're like, wow, that sounds great. You mean kind of like After Effects or something? Like, yeah, sort of, except for it uses these things. And you go, what are those? Like, again, I'm just going to close this.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, that's literally where I was at. When I first opened it, it was so hard to understand the idea. Like we were talking, like for me, once I started figuring out it felt more like guitar pedals, that's when it made sense. When I went, oh, okay, it's more like being a musician. Like I have different pedals I can plug in. And I kind of looked at it and went, well, that media in one is like my guitar and the media out is like my amp. They're kind of going to be, the stuff in the middle is more or less the stuff I add on is what's going to really change the footage I'm working with. But let me ask you a question here while we're sitting here.
Okay.
You opened up the edit page. I typically do not run dual screen preview when I'm in the edit page. I don't know if that's just me, or maybe it's just the way I grew up because I'm a simpleton and a noob. But I'm usually editing something and I have one screen open.
Sure.
But when it comes to the Fusion page, it sort of starts with two windows, and I find myself now using the dual screen display far more often in Fusion than any other page, just because of the fact of being able to see nodes you're working on and then the final output. Can you just give us a real simple, I don't know, text over a background kind of, example of where those two screens can come in handy in Fusion for people who might be like me, who are used to using like a single preview window?
Sure. Yeah. Some of this is a little chicken before the egg, because if you're intimidated by nodes, we might want to wait on that for just a second. But okay, just ignore what the nodes are doing here for a second. All right. So let's just say we're going to make some text over a background, and then we're going to color correct it and take the saturation down. Okay. So ignore what we did there, but the end product is going to be a black and white screen with some text over it, right? If you want to see any part of this before it kind of gets put together, you can kind of check in at different checkpoints with this left viewer. So I could go and hit 1 on the keyboard, or I can also drag this node up into this viewer, and that's going to show me this piece before some stuff gets applied to it, right? I could do the same thing with text. I can look at the text before anything gets applied to it. I can look at the green with the text over it. I can look at the brightness and contrast being adjusted or being put on it. So it's like you can look at different parts of your composition. It's kind of like if you had layers, you're looking at one of the lower layers without all the other layers above it. It's kind of like soloing it almost.
Well, this is a great example that you have right here. Like, here's a very common thing that someone might do in the edit page. They might have like a background, maybe that's a video or whatever that might be. They might want to add text over their video, and then maybe they want to, make sure the colors look a little better. So seeing it this way in nodes, can you just kind of explain, what the difference in this layout, the way nodes are compared to layers, or what we're seeing in the way that things are stacking? Is it right to left, up to down? Because sometimes I think people look at nodes and they're like, all those lines in between don't make sense. I don't understand where I'm supposed to connect them. So can you just explain this nice, simple thing you built in a way that can make sense to someone who's never really used Fusion before?
Sure, yeah. So, okay, so let's just back up here for just a second. So we generally have like two pieces of a node flow that we start out with. One of the most important parts is this media out. So this media out, anything that you connect to this, that's what's going to be rendered out. That's what's going to be output. So you can think of that as like if you have a TV and this is like the HDMI in. This is what's going to go into the TV, right? So if you don't have anything connected to the media out, we can see on the right, it just goes blank, okay? So anything that I connect to that media out is going to actually be shown on the screen. So if I were to put this Fusion composition into a timeline, or if I were to render it out, that's what we're going to see. So if I have this green background, which I can drag to this left viewer and see, okay, this is green, that's great. I'll make it bright green, sure. I can take this and plug this into the input of the media out, and then that's what's going to be shown on the edit page. So
okay, so here's a perfect example, go back to that, of where me coming into the software the first time I used it immediately confused me. And I know that I am one of the biggest noobs out there, self-professed. I've called myself the HNIC, I am the head noob in charge. And like seeing like, wait a minute, why am I seeing two green screens? I don't, this is confusing to me. Why am I not just seeing, like I thought one was the output, but now I'm seeing two, and I don't understand what you just did. Could you just very simply explain what we're looking at right here?
Yeah. So every node can be shown on either of these screens. By default, the media out is on this screen. I can tell that in a couple ways. One is it says media out up here above the screen. The other one is there's this little tiny dot right here. There's two dots. There's two black dots. And if one of them is white, then that means that's going to be in that viewer. So the right for the right viewer, left for the left viewer. Okay. You'll notice that here on the left, we see this background 1. And we also have these little dots. And on the left, there is a white dot, which means that this is loaded into the left viewer. Okay. This makes a little more sense when these aren't the exact same thing. So if I brought in an effect that maybe desaturates it, maybe makes it darker, right? We can see we start this. So this is like the start, and then it does some stuff, and then this is the end. All right. I could also switch these confusingly if we want to. I can view the start on the right and the end on the left, but because that's confusing, I usually just do it this way. I almost always just keep my media out on the right, just because it feels like the edit page, where when I have the inspector closed, I can look at, a piece of footage here on the left. It doesn't mean anything. I'm just looking at the piece of footage, but what I'm actually going to see and render is on the right. So we're looking at a piece here on the left, and if we want it to actually be shown, we have to drag it to the timeline, and then it shows up on the right. Same thing here in Fusion. I can look at a piece right here, and actually I can even disconnect it from media out like this, but we're not going to see it on the right until I plug this into the media out, and that's what's actually going to happen there, right?
Okay, so just so I'm clear, basically that media out is the equivalent of what I would see if I were working in the edit page, had a bunch of layers, and I had the main viewer up there of what was going to be, well, like if I was going to export. I'm looking at the entire project as I build it. So that media out is sort of like representing when if I was on the edit page, it would be a bunch of layers and tracks coming together. This is more, that media out is really representing, well, this is like all of your nodes and what you might be doing in Fusion coming together. And I do the same thing. I put it up in the right-hand side because my brain, I don't know, maybe because I'm a righty, I put it up in the right. And then it makes a lot of sense. So the only reason we see it in the right is you've chosen to put the media out in the upper right viewer in a dual viewer mode. Yep.
And you can just put it in the single viewer mode. If you just click on this, then if it's confusing, I would just start with this just in a single viewer. The part where you get in trouble is when you either don't have when you don't have your media out loaded in the right viewer. And then you're like, why, if you're putting together some, I don't know, let's do it this way. If you're like, okay, my brightness and contrast, and I'm going to change this brightness and contrast, and why isn't it changing? What's the problem? It's because I don't have the media out here on actually loaded in the viewer. That's where you have enough freedom to kind of get in trouble.
Well, right? I've done that exact same thing where I'll start building out a bigger node tree, and then I'll make an adjustment, and I don't see anything happen on screen. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like over adjusting or doing like overcompensating. And it's only because I don't have it displayed. And I'm like, why is it changing?
It happens to me all the time.
I told you, noob. All right, so really basically what we're looking at here is just almost, if you want to call it layers, if you want, call it anything you want, it's a background. You've got a color correction node. Is that what you have on there?
Yeah.
And then just the output, and you've got the output of it sitting up on the preview window so you can look at it. So it is a lot like, instead of on the edit page, if we had a track and we wanted to make it blur or something, we'd probably go over to our effects on the left and maybe find a blur, and then just drag it over and drop it onto our clip in our timeline, right?
Yep, exactly. Like
so that's
that.
how we would do it. But in Fusion, it's it's sort of separated into nodes. Like you look at it and go, here's your clip, that's the node, that's what we're starting with. And if you want to add a blur, if you want to change the color, if you want to do something different, add a text layer, these all become, instead of separate layers, they become separate nodes.
Yeah, you can think of like each node as a step. Okay, so it's like a job put into a box. All right, so this media in, let's say, so it has one job, and its job is to bring this image into Fusion. Okay, so all it's doing is loading the image, it's doing nothing else to it. Then this goes along this yellow line and it gets plugged into the media out. The media out's job is to put it into the timeline. So if I were in the edit page here and I were to grab my Fusion composition that I'm working on, what it's going to do is show that image in the timeline. Okay? So if I go back to Fusion, this is, all I'm doing is just opening the image and putting it back into the timeline. If I want to change the image or do something, it has to run through some kind of effect. Okay? So if I want to blur it, I can grab this blur, drop this in between, and you'll notice the signal flow here. So it goes from image, and then it goes through this effect, and then into the media out. This effect I can adjust by selecting and then changing in the inspector, just like you would select a effect or a clip and then adjust its effect in the edit page. I can push up this blur size, and here's where we can look at the two viewers. I can bring up my image before it's blurred on the left, and then my media out on the right, and I can see what happens when it's blurred, right? But what's going to happen is whatever's connected to the media out, if I go to the edit page, that's what we're going to see on the edit page.
Let me ask one question while you're talking about edit page. Here's one of the things that also took me a minute to figure out. You just started with a Fusion composition. Like you created a Fusion composition in the edit page, I believe. Is that what you were at? I think you started there. There's different, let me ask this a better way. Sometimes it's like you have a clip in your timeline and you click on it and you open it in Fusion.
Yep.
And sometimes there is no clip, you just go into Fusion. And sometimes you're in the edit page and you create a Fusion composition that is nothing but a giant empty box, and then you go into Fusion. The entry points to me can be a little confusing.
Yes.
Can you put a little bit of a comb through that for people who are like, I don't even quite understand how to get my stuff into the Fusion page?
It's amazing how even just that part is confusing. Yes, so there's really two ways that you can have a Fusion composition. You can have one that lives in the media pool that's just like, you can think of it like you're making a new piece of media that lives in the media pool, and that's like a source, right? But you can also have it live in the timeline as its own thing. Okay, so if I were to, like usually when you're doing visual effects, right? So when you're adjusting a video, so here I have a video of a guy shooting a gun, right? If I want to add a muzzle flash to this, a lot of the time I'll make my edit, and I'll have this part of a sequence, and then I'll say, okay, I want to add my muzzle flash. And so all I have to do is be over this in the edit page, just have my playhead over it, and then I just click into the Fusion page, and what it will do is open up that clip from that timeline in the edit page. So it's not opening up the original clip. I mean, it kind of is, but it's that clip from the timeline. Okay.
Okay, well, what if you were in your timeline and you had 8 tracks? And your playhead is stacked. It's got a bunch of stuff stacked on top of each other. How would I open that up in Fusion?
It takes the top track
Okay.
that is enabled. So if I had, the grunge yellow over this or whatever, this grunge. So whatever's on top, that's what's going to open up in Fusion. So this is going to open up my grunge, right? So generally what you do is you can disable this and then go into Fusion and then that's a way to do it. You could also just move it over or whatever you want to do.
Can you get into Fusion from like a right-click menu on a clip, on a clip level from the edit page?
Yeah, you could right-click on it and say Open in Fusion Page. That's a way to do it too. Yep. Yeah. Kind of depends on what you want to do. You know,
I think that's one of the things for me that was like really, when I first started using it, it was like when I figured out how to use Fusion, then it was like, oh no, you can come in a whole different door with a different, and it has a different look and a different feel. And I think that's part of it. I don't know about the other people in chat and watching in the replay, but that was really confusing for me. It was really hard to wrap my head around. I understand the edit page. If I grab something and drag it into the timeline, there it is. That's how it got there.
Yeah.
But in Fusion, it's like, oh no, we can do things differently here. We can,
it's crazy.
We can build things crazy.
Yep. And so, so you can grab things from the timeline, and so that's really good if you have something that you want to edit in Fusion, right? If you're going to make something from scratch, something like a title or a template or something, oftentimes what I'll do is I'll right-click in the media pool and just say Create New Fusion Composition. And what that does is that creates a Fusion composition that lives independently of any timeline. See, the thing that's dangerous about this is, okay, let's say I do tons and tons of work on this clip and I really like it, but if I delete it from the timeline, it's gone forever. It isn't anywhere else. It lives in the timeline. And so what's nice is if you want to work on, if you're making something, especially if you want to reuse it, if you make a new Fusion composition here in the media pool, that lives in the media pool. And so I'll just make something, I'll just make like a, whatever, like a blue screen, okay? This is my blue screen, and that is a Fusion composition that lives in the media pool, all right? So it's almost like it's a source clip, although it lives in the project of Resolve. I can drag this in to make an it's a copy of it that goes in the timeline. And so now I can have that blue composition anywhere and kind of reuse it. What's interesting about this is you would think that if you were to edit any of these, and let's say I were to go and edit this and say, okay, I don't want this to be blue anymore, I want it to be pink. That changes it to pink here in the timeline as expected, but look at this. This one is still blue. This one is still blue. They're both blue.
Okay, so in that instance, it's not too dissimilar from if you had a video clip in your media pool and you brought it into your timeline more than once, right? You can do that. You can grab a clip and bring it down in. You could grab another clip and bring it down in. And if you made a change to one clip, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to affect the first clip, even though they're the identical clip. So they do live independently in the timeline, even though they're the same source Fusion composition up in the media pool.
Yeah, it's very similar to that. That's a great way to think about it. What I think trips people up is they think that, okay, if this is a template or some kind, like if they're doing a title and they change the text here, they expect it to ripple down to everything else and change the text everywhere, which is just not how it works. You know, if you have some text and you change it here, you also need to go off and change it here if you want it to be the same. There's other ways to like make it a template and stuff that we don't need to get into, but that's how it works. Is it's always a copy of things, which is great for keeping things safe, you know, and not messing up your original stuff. But one last thing I want to show about this is if I do want to, so okay, this is interesting. So I can take this down and make it blue, right? But if I go in here and change the color, that's only going to change it right here. If I go in here and change the color, so we'll change this to, I don't know, this cyan kind of thing, then it's going to change it here, but next time I drag it down, that's going to use that new color, right? And so this is kind of more, it's still making a copy, but this is kind of like the master version of it compared to these.
So once you change it at the source, those changes will always hang out in that source of the original Fusion composition.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
It just lives in a different place instead of in a timeline. It's like in a box.
This makes a lot more sense to me. Like this was one of the things, and I don't know if it was just me, but this was the kind of stuff, Casey, that was when I first opened up Fusion was like, just teach me like what are nodes? How do I get into Fusion? Like what is it supposed to do? And I feel like once I started learning the workflow, life got better for me. Like I kind of went, it was almost like learning to speak another language. And once you started learning some of the language, it was easier to remember how to use it, and it became a little more second nature.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that some of the people here in the community, at least the ones I've talked to, have started to feel that same way. Like when I start talking to them, a lot of them will start asking me questions like, all right, I'm starting to understand nodes. And then they start asking me like questions like, what's the best node? What's the node that I don't know about? Like, what's the one I should pay attention to?
Oh, yeah.
Because you start learning the basic stuff, and then it becomes another thing. So I'm going to pass. I think someone even in the chat asked that same question. I'm going to ask that question when we're here in Fusion. Right now, I know that I get a preview window, and I know that I have, if I bring nodes down here and I can connect them and I can start building stuff out in a node-based structure system, and instead of a layer-based, but it's still a lot of the same ideas. You're modifying something and then sending it back out to an output. That's what video editing is in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the things as you start to understand how nodes work and you start to understand how the Fusion page works? What are some of the things that you think young creators, newer creators, people who aren't really familiar with the Fusion page miss when they first get in here? What's some of the functionality that you think they should be spending more time in the Fusion page learning instead of maybe wrestling with on the edit page?
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like there's a couple of questions there. I think I'd like to back up just a touch.
Do your thing.
Because when it comes to nodes, so there are 345 or something nodes in Fusion. It's a ridiculous amount.
Can you name them all?
Yeah. How much time you got? Yeah, no problem. I can actually name them. Here, this is from memory, just so you know. Ambient light, direct, no. But here's the thing. There are really only 4 kinds of nodes. There's really only 4 different types. And the thing is, it's like, even though there's so many different nodes, if you understand there's 4 basic types of nodes, then you can almost guess how to use a node. And so this is the 80-20 of, I mean, it's probably more like whatever 340 divided by 4 is. It's that of this. It's the biggest bang for your buck. Okay, so I think that's the most valuable thing to learn about Fusion. So we have the media in and media out. Okay, the media in, this is an image node. So the idea is that it either brings in or creates an image. And there are a few nodes that do things like that. And really we talk about each node's job. So its job is to make an image or to bring in an image, to somehow get an image happening.
And when you say image, we don't just mean like an image like a JPEG file. That could be a video too, right? Like just anything
Absolutely.
We're seeing.
Yes.
Okay.
Pixels on a grid that are displayed in some way.
That was my high school band name.
Yeah, Pixels on a grid.
We were huge.
Oh,
in Sacramento.
Yeah. That's awesome. So there's a few different kind of images. So one of them would be a background. So a background makes an image. It's generating an image, but it makes an image. And so you can actually see this is a 1920 by 1080 image, and it's all this red. Okay? Text, same thing. This is making an image. It's generating text to make an image, but this is creating a 1920 by 1080 image of whatever this text is rendering, right? There's this other node called fast noise, which makes clouds. This is an image of clouds. All right, so these are all doing the same thing, and you'll notice something. We haven't quite got into these connectors yet, but these all have similar connectors. They have a blue connector and a gray connector, right? These all work essentially the same way. There are different options here within to make the image. So, fast noise is going to have different things like scale or whatever, where text is going to have, text controls. Background is going to have color controls. Media in is just going to have like layer controls and things like that. But they're all making an image. So this is 1/4 of what you need to know already. Okay. So
I'm following along.
An image.
Making notes in here.
An image, generally what you're doing with an image is you're modifying it some way. You're either modifying it or you're putting it over another image. Those are really like, well, yeah. You're modifying it or putting it over another image. So to modify it, you run it through an effect, okay? So an effect needs an image. It doesn't create an image by itself. So if I grab something like a color correction node, and I bring this over, let's just, yeah, put this over here on the left. You'll see I can't actually put it on the left. It won't let me do it. If I try and put it on the right, it won't let me do it. It just turns red. The reason for that is because a effect node always needs an image. It doesn't live by itself. It can only live, it can only exist when an image is plugged into it, okay?
All right, hang on. Slow down here. I'm going to follow along here. So what you're saying is, if it's an effect, I'm a guitar player. Mm-hmm. It's like a distortion pedal, right?
Sure.
If I'm not plugging a guitar into the distortion pedal and then eventually out the amp so you can hear it, in this case, something plugged into an effect, I can't just take a distortion pedal and plug it into an amp and go, listen to that distortion.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Gotcha. And what do we call this? So the first group of nodes that you tend to break things down is image nodes.
Yep.
This is effect. So we're calling the second type of node effect nodes?
Yep. Yeah, effect nodes. And so again, these all work in a similar way. Actually, let's kind of back up here. So this color corrector node, let's say I want to desaturate it. Again, I can't even look at it because I don't have anything plugged into it. But if I take this media in, and let's plug this into the color corrector node and do this media out, okay? So that's desaturating that media in, that image, okay? Same thing for the background. I'll plug the background into that yellow input. That's going to desaturate this background. So here's before and here's after, okay? Let's grab the text, put that into the color corrector node. That's not actually going to do anything, but if I make the text a different color, like, I don't know, this color, it's going to desaturate it, right? Same thing for fast noise. Let's, again, make it a color because I didn't plan this. Pink goes into the color corrector and it desaturates it, right? So it's meant to go in between an image and an output.
Gotcha.
All right, just like your distortion pedal goes between your guitar and your amp. Okay.
Right. Got to have both of those. You got to have all three. You got to have something plugged into it, and it's got to plug back out to the media out so we can see all the things that are happening.
Exactly. So this color corrector, this is very similar. This is the same way something like curves or a brightness contrast or a blur or even something like a green screen keyer or anything like that. It needs an image, it does something to the image, and then it outputs a different image, right? So same thing, you know, color curves, same thing, right? That has to have an image. If you don't have an image, it doesn't know where its hands are and it loses its mind, okay?
Got it.
So yeah, that's the second kind. So we've covered two kinds so far. We have images and we have effects.
I'm with you so far. You have not lost this noob.
That's pretty good. Something to mention. A transform node is also an effect.
Really?
So a transform, because think about it, you can't view a transform. What's it transforming?
Right.
It's changing an image, right? But if I take this text and plug it into the transform, then I can make it a different size and that kind of thing, right? So a transform's an effect too. So all of those are effects. The other thing that you might do with an image is put an image over another image, all right? And you can think about this logically, like if I have an image, let's say I want to put this text over a background. So here's our background, here's our text. Would it make sense for me to run this background through the text? Not really. You can hook it up that way, but it's not going to work the way you want, and we'll talk about that in a second. The way that we need to do it is run it through a merge. So a merge node is sort of like an effect, actually, but the thing that it does is it puts an image over another image. So we take this background and we put this into the merge, and that's going to give us just the background. And one thing that I like to do when it comes to nodes is if you start with the first node and then you travel along this yellow line and then you just say what each node's job is, it helps you, I call it reading the nodes, all right? So make a background, make a red background. Okay, make a red background and then merge. Take that and put nothing over it. That's what we're doing. Okay, that's great. This green input for a merge, that's the foreground. You can always figure out what these little inputs are. If you mouse over them, it'll tell you what it is. So this is, the yellow is the background, the green is the foreground. So I can take this text, plug it into the green foreground, and now we're telling it, take this background and put something over it. What are we putting over it in the foreground? This text. This text is green. Okay, so now we have green text over a red background. So that's the third kind of node, is a merge. It puts an image over another image.
Okay, just staying here for a second. So when we're thinking about merge nodes, it's kind of like if we were adding more tracks to our edit page. When you want, like the first type, if we were gonna have, if we had a piece of footage in the edit page and we were gonna maybe change the size of it or spin it around or zoom in, that would all be done up in the inspector, right? We're still right in that same inline process with that video clip. If we were going to add an effect onto something like a piece of video in a single track in our edit page timeline, we might drop a blur under it. It would all happen within that contained piece of footage clip, that little rectangle we see.
Yep.
But when we go to add something like text on the edit page, it typically goes into another layer on top.
Yep.
And that is what the merge layer is basically doing here, is it's saying, hey, it's time to add another layer on top.
Yep.
We need a merge to do that.
Yep, exactly. Yeah,
Cool.
it's always, so this is where people get really tripped up, is when I start talking about merge nodes, they go, okay, well, let's say I have some text, all right, and I love this text, it's great, but I want to put a blur on it. And so they go, okay, to put a blur on top of this, what I'll do is I'll grab a merge node, and I'll put this into the merge node and then put the blur into the foreground. And then why isn't it blurring? I push up the blur size and why doesn't it work? Oh no. The reason why, there's two reasons. There's two reasons why. First is this effect, remember, that only works if an image runs through it. Okay? So we're basically telling it not to do anything. If we look at this blur, it's not doing anything because there's no image, right? We already learned that. Then we're taking this blurred nothing, this pretend magical idea that doesn't exist, and then putting that over our text, which does nothing, right? So that's why that doesn't work, is because there's no image to put over. So the only reason you use a merge, the only reason that you use a merge is to put an image over another image. This blur does not have an image, so that's why it doesn't work. If you want to blur something, you don't use a merge, you run it through the blur, right?
Okay, so that is our first type of node was an image. The second type of node was an effect node. And merge nodes are there as the third type is its own category. Are there other nodes that fall under the merge node category?
Yes. We probably don't really need to get into it right now, but yeah, there are other nodes that do that. But essentially, if there's a node that puts an image over another node or another image, I would probably call that a merge node. There is a multi-merge.
So that's its own category. We call third type of node merge.
Yeah.
Give or take.
But
all right, trying to hang in there with you.
That's all right. So this is a really important. Okay, so if you're using Fusion, I want you to talk in this way. I'm going to run this through a blur. I'm going to run this image through a color corrector. I'm going to run this text through a brightness and contrast. Okay? I'm going to run it through it. I'm going to put it through an effect. Because if you start talking like, I'm going to put a blur on this, then when you're talking about putting something on something else, that sounds like a merge. But that's not how it works.
Wait a minute. That is a golden nugget right there. is just changing your language mindset while you're in Fusion to say, listen, I'm not, in the edit page you might add a blur to your footage, right? You drop it on there, right? Like I'm gonna grab a blur effect and drop it on my footage.
Yes.
That's in Fusion, think of it a little different. You're gonna run something through anything that you're going to immediately affect that one image. Mm-hmm. If you're sitting with an image, a media in one node, if you're going to blur it, change the color, twist it around, zoom in on it, all that stuff that you do, that's going through that. That's going through those nodes, those effect nodes. But when you get to wanting to put something on top, like think about adding text on top of your video footage,
Yep.
that's when we're going to merge.
Yep. I think that's the biggest thing that people get stuck on when it comes to nodes is they don't know when to use a merge. And because until you understand that, it seems random. It seems like, oh, sometimes I use a merge and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I run it through something and sometimes I don't. And then, you're going to probably pick the wrong one if you don't know the reasons why. And so then you're just confused and you're like, oh, well, I don't get this. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I got to tell you, for some people who might be here right now thinking, oh, I know this. This is the single biggest hurdle, in my opinion, that creators face when they first open up Fusion. The idea of they're not layers, they seem to be little rectangles. That's scary. I don't have rectangles in my life unless they're like shoe boxes. I don't walk around my house and ever run into a situation where I'm plugging a rectangle in, unless you're me and you own guitars and effects pedals.
Literally,
right?
like that's when it comes up, basically.
The one time it would happen. So this is so helpful to know that's all this is. We're either running through something or we're adding something on top, in which case we're a merge. We got image nodes, we have effect nodes, and merge nodes are the third type that are really adding layers when you get to the point where you're putting something on top, an image on top of an image, a text, which is still image, on top of an image. Anything you're layering on top to stack up like you would in the edit page in separate tracks is more like something you would merge here in Fusion.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. So yeah, those are kind of the first three. So there's images, effects, and merges, all right? And just knowing that stuff, you can do almost anything in Fusion. It's pretty wild. I'm going to show you one more kind of node, and this is essential for compositing. And that's a mask. So the entire concept of a mask, we can talk about that more if we want to, but essentially what we're doing is we can draw a shape on the screen that tells that is designed to tell a node where to do its job on the screen. Okay, so let me show you kind of an idea here. Let's just grab a background. So this is our background. It's red. What we're doing, if we were just looking at this background, we're saying, okay, Fusion, draw a red background all over the screen. And it goes, sweet. Here it is. So if we grab a mask, which is we have a few masks right here. We can grab maybe this ellipse mask, and this draws a circle on the screen. And we can adjust the size of the circle or whatever we want to do. But what we can do is we can apply this circle to any node. And we do that by connecting it to the little blue input. The little blue input is the mask input of the node. And it's essentially what you're doing is you're saying, okay, do your job, node, make this red background, but I'm going to have this ellipse mask that looks like this, that has a circle in the middle. I want you to just do your job right here, right inside of the circle. Okay? So that's the place where you do your job. And this is the language here is really, really important too. Okay? I'm not cutting out the image. I'm not I'm not masking the image itself necessarily. I'm telling a node where to do its job. If you think about it that way, then a mask makes sense for anything that you apply it to, okay? So if I had this background, and then I had this brightness and contrast, all right? And I were to put this through this brightness and contrast here, and take the gain down, let's say. I don't, if I apply this ellipse to the blue input of this mask, think about what I'm doing here. I have this brightness and contrast. Its job is to take everything and then darken it down. It's not, it's just darkening it down. If I take this ellipse and plug this in here, I'm saying just darken it down inside of that mask.
Okay. All right. Okay. I think I'm following you here. So the mask, because here's one of the things a lot of us are used to, maybe going into like the color page, and when we think about masking, we're like, oh, I'm going to remove the background, right? I want to remove the background and put something crazy behind me, so I'm going to remove. We think remove the background because we're masking it out. But when we're here in Fusion, correct me if I'm wrong, The mask is really just setting boundaries of where you want something else to do its thing. And those
Yes.
boundaries don't necessarily mean, like in here, you haven't removed the rest of the red. You are just, before you had said, I said the boundaries of only be red within the confines of this circular mask when it was applied to the color, the red node. But when you moved it over to another node that was changing the saturation of it or the color of it, now you've masked out that, and now they're interplaying in ways that the mask is telling other nodes what to do. But now this is where it gets confusing for me, though, right? Because how do you know where to connect what to what? Like, even in this simple 3-node criteria here, you got a 3-node tree. How did you know what to connect to what? And why don't I see a media out node anymore? Like, where did that one go?
Sure. So so real quick on the media out, if I were to put this into the edit page, we wouldn't see what we're looking at. This is one of the advantages and disadvantages of working with nodes, is you can just make a whole separate crazy little sidebar thing out here and play with it and not have it be part of your main thing. All right. Which I just kind of do because I'm explaining things. But
okay, well, but if you wanted to, like if I said, well, how do I get that back into the edit page? How would I do that?
You just connect it to the media out. So here's my media out. It was just down here off screen. I can grab this and connect it in there. And then that's going to give us our media out. That's what it's going to look like.
Got it. Okay, let me ask you another question.
Okay.
What if you had started without them? Is there any situation where I would not have a media out and I need to add one? Is there a way, like say I started just, I don't know, I opened up Fusion and I just grab a text node or something and brought it down into the text node graph area. Is there a way to then add a media out node? Is there some option for that?
Yes. Well, anytime that you have a Fusion composition, it's going to make a media out node because you need it. However, sometimes you accidentally delete it. And then you go, well, I have to restart. No, I'm just kidding. I
just want to say for the record, I would never, ever do that.
Oh, yeah, me either.
Ever.
Definitely haven't done that before.
And never did it before.
Of course. So two things you could do. One, you could go to Effects and under, I forget where it even is. But there is let's just find it, Media Out. There is a tool called Media Out, and you can drag this in. And guess what? You have your media out again. Yay! You can also, now this is a next level Fusion tip, you guys. So if you do this, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I know Fusion. You can impress people. You can lie on your resume, right? All you have to do is hit Shift Spacebar, and that will bring up this fancy thing, and you can search for any node in the world. All right? So it's just like a quick search. Media out, great, like that. Select it, hit Add, and that will add that media out.
All right. For 1 second here. So you had some effects nodes up in the upper left. You opened up that menu.
Yep.
And then you hit Shift plus Spacebar. Is that the same on Mac and PC?
I believe so, yeah.
And it will open up basically a search menu of, does it search all the nodes?
Yep, searches everything. Cool. Yep. Yeah, that's the quickest way, is just Shift Spacebar, type whatever you want. There's actually even little like shorthand things, like if you type BG, that will bring up background, so you don't have to type out all of background. And so as you get more used to Fusion, you remember those things. Like if I do like XF, that's transform. And so you can quickly add things like that. Because yeah, you can just hit enter and brings up a transform node, which is kind of cool.
Okay, well, speaking of adding things, there's a question right from the chat. Okay, Casey, Mr. Fusion.
All right,
what if
all
I
right,
wanted
Mr.
to...
Super Guy. If you know everything.
Mr. Shift Spacebar, superpowers. Woo. What if I wanted to add a second ellipse? I'm guessing he's asking like a second mask to this small node tree that you've created. What would you do then, tough guy?
Yeah, so the cool thing about masks is you can stack them. So you could take a mask like this, like in another ellipse, and just run this into that one. And by default, there are options and stuff, but by default, it's going to just add those both together. All right, so you can stack a bunch of these together, and you can make all kinds of crazy complex shapes with 15 different masks, and it all combines into one mask. You plug that one mask into whatever node you want to mask.
Okay, so you can just add them, like you said earlier. I probably should have asked you about that. 'Cause there are different input, the little tiny triangles and dots that seem to be surrounding these nodes, which can be confusing too. You told us the ones at the bottom, when you click on the node, you have that little one in the lower left that has the dots that tells us, you know, you want to see it in the upper left monitor preview, preview window, or the upper right preview. You've got a little square dot coming off the node to the right that seems to be the output of everything, right?
Yep. That's the output. Yep.
But then they have different little triangles, and some are yellow and some are blue. And I saw you hover on them, and as you hovered, there was some dialogue that showed up. Is that something that is helpful for users to understand what those are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. It will tell you the property basically that it's being connected to, right? So this is brightness and contrast effect mask. So blue is always effect mask. Yellow is generally the main input for a node. I say generally because there are some nodes where it calls for several different inputs. And when you're getting to that point where you're using those nodes, you're going to be more used to using inputs and everything, so it's not as big of a deal. But something like a merge node, right? That has 3 inputs: yellow input, which is the background; green input, which is the foreground; blue input, which is the effect mask. All right, and then we have that square output also.
Okay, so let's say we were talking about merge nodes, our third type of node, as you graciously explained to us. If I had 2 things going into a merge node, earlier you were talking about things like a background and text, or maybe you could have 2 images or 2 text layers because they're both image type nodes. What if I want now if I was on the edit page and I wanted to change which was on top of each other, I would put that in a higher track. Whatever I want to be on, if I want text on top of my video, I put text in a higher track. If I have multiple layers of images and things that I'm trying to layer up, can I just swap the inputs to get them to be, you know, in the foreground and in the background?
Absolutely. Okay, so let's make this here. This is just going to be a red background with text over it. Okay, and let's do that. So it's very, very important. So this is one of those really essential concepts. It doesn't matter where your nodes are on the flow. It doesn't matter if they go left or right or up or down. All that matters is what color are they connected to. Okay? All that matters is what color are they connected to. So if I have my background like this over my text, it doesn't mean anything because it's connected to this yellow input, which is the background. Okay? So if I want to change the foreground and the background, I don't move these around unless I want to just to stay organized. But what really needs to happen is I need to connect my text into my background, and my background, or here, we'll just call this red because it's confusing. Red.
Wait, stay here for 1 minute because someone actually just asked, is there a way to label these nodes? What did you just do? You changed the name because when you get a lot of nodes and they just have the generic, whatever name they call them, it must get confusing if you have many different nodes in a graph or a tree, right?
Yep. Select it, hit F2. You can rename any node. That's the way to do it.
Sweet.
Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll rename it and then do underscore whatever the node is, like BG for background. Okay?
If they're, because sometimes I always worry about like some OSs have different keyboard shortcuts. Is there a right-click menu to find to rename a node?
Yep. Right-click, rename.
Okay,
Just
cool.
like that.
And when it shows for your operating system, when you did that, it actually shows F2. So it shows the keyboard shortcut.
Yep.
Cool.
So if I'm wanting to switch these, I put my red into the foreground and the text into the background. And now I can't see my text anymore because I have the red over my text, right? There's also, I can select this and hit Control T. You can think of like track, like switch the track. Control T switches the foreground and the background. And look what happens here. Look at the colors switching there. When I hit Control T, that switches the colors. It's very, very subtle, but that's what it's doing.
It's just switching the inputs. I see it now, right? So it looks like all the nodes are still in the same place, but when you hit T, the colors of the little, like you can see it in the line. So there's a question too. I'm noticing the lines that are connecting the text to the merge and the color background to the merge are the color of the input triangle. Is that common? Is that if when they switch, will they change colors too? Like right now I'm seeing the text,
Yes,
the connector
the
line
lines,
is green or yellow.
Yeah, the lines take the color of whatever it's connected to.
Cool. So then we know green is foreground because I'm assuming text is on top of the red right now. So if it's green, it's going to be in the foreground.
Yep.
Yellow is going to be in the background.
That's right.
Got it.
That's right. Okay. So we were talking about masks. And so this is the fourth kind of thing. So when you're thinking about a mask, it's always helpful to think of, okay, whatever node you're doing, when you connect a mask to it, you're saying just do it right here. Okay? So if I want to mask this text and I grab a ellipse mask, I can say draw this text, and we'll just bring this up on the left. Draw this text, but just do it right here. All right? So I have this circle, and it only draws the text within the circle. Okay? Only right there. I can do this on the red background instead. Draw the red background just right there. So it leaves the text alone.
Well, here's a cool thing that almost goes unnoticed. The ellipse mask node that you are moving back and forth, it in and of itself would be categorized in the 4 types of nodes that you explained to us, would be the fourth kind, a mask node.
Yes.
So when you connect it by just dragging the output over to another node, whether that be the text or the background, does it automatically know to connect to the mask input of that node?
Yes. By default, it will do that. You can connect it to the other inputs, actually. Because if you want to get really technical, this mask input, I call this a separate thing, but it's really an image. It's actually an image. What this is doing is it's an easy way to generate a shape. It's an easy way to generate an image of a shape. And it's black and white, but it also has a transparency channel. Okay? So the reason why a mask works is because whatever's connected to this blue input, that node by default will look at the transparency of whatever's connected, and it will apply that transparency and only do its job within that, within whatever you connected is opaque. All right. I know that was a lot of words.
Nope, that makes sense. I'm following along. Is everybody in the chat? If you're following along, give me a thumbs up. If all of this has made sense so far, give me a thumbs up in the chat. All right. So I think I understand that so far. So a mask, technically, could you connect a mask node directly to a media out?
Yes, you could.
Okay.
A mask is really just an image. It's like an image that's specially tagged to work as a mask, basically. Whereas if I were to plug an image into this, it wouldn't necessarily, like if I were just to go like this, it plugs it into the mask. But if I just had an image, and in fact, in this case, it probably would. But if I plug this in, that would be green. That would be the foreground. But if I were to take just a mask and plug this in here, it's going to connect it to the mask. It just makes it slightly easier because it knows it's a mask, but it's really an image. Okay? So the reason why I make this kind of a separate thing is just because it's kind of optimized for masking. What's interesting is this mask, I can run this through effects because it's an image, right? So I could run this through something like a transform, right? And then, but if I want to plug that into the image input of the transform, that will make this a black and white image, and I can size it up and that kind of thing, just like I would for any image. If I plug this into the mask input of the transform, we can read it, right? So we're saying transform something, but I'm not giving you anything to transform. It's an effect without an image, but only do it within this circle. And the transform goes, I don't care about the circle. I don't even have an image, so I'm not going to do anything.
Got it. Wow.
Yeah. But what's so cool, the thing that I love about nodes is they're so versatile because you can take this one image, this one mask, let's say, and you could say, okay, I have this circle, and I can apply this to anything I want. I can mask the text, I can mask the red, I can mask the merge, which is interesting. So let's say, ooh, I lost a light. I'll probably lose the other light too. They're on batteries. Oh well. Let's say I have this text and then I run it through a blur. Okay, so I have this blurry text. Remember, this this mask is only, it just bosses nodes around, and it says, node, do your job within this circle. So I can mask the text, and it's only going to draw this text inside of that circle. Here, we'll show that. And then, or I can connect it to the blur, and it's only going to blur it within the circle. I can connect it to the merge, and it's only going to merge it within the circle.
Got it.
So the merge's job is to put a foreground over a background. And so when we mask a merge, we're not masking the whole image, we're masking the foreground. We're actually masking the operation of putting the foreground over the background. So put the foreground over the background, but only within this circle. And so when you think about it like that and you go, okay, what do I want to happen here, right? If I want the text to be limited and then blurred, I got to mask the text first. If I want the text to be there but only blurred in a certain place, then I mask the blur. If I only want the red to be within the circle, I mask the red. If I only want the blurry text to show up inside of this circle, I can mask the merge. If I want the entire thing to completely be limited by this circle, well, one thing I could do would be just to connect this to multiple things. That's the insane thing about nodes, is you can connect this to lots of stuff.
Oh, wait. So you're saying this one circular mask that you have created doesn't only have to affect one other property or one other node in your node tree. You can keep connecting that output to the mask inputs of other things, and it'll apply that same mask to the color and the text, and it can keep somewhat limitlessly. Anything that has a mask input, you could mask with it simultaneously. Yeah.
In fact, any node's output can go in an infinite, probably not infinite, but hundreds of places if you want. You can. That's one of the amazing things about nodes, is you can use this ellipse mask, and I can just move this one mask around, and that's going to affect multiple things, right? Same thing is, I could take this text and I could put this, through an effect over here. I could take multiple outputs like this, and have a version that's darker, right? I could have a version that's blurry or less blurry or whatever, and I could have 20 different versions that run through different effects, all from the same source, and then merge those together down the line or something like that. It's absolutely like, and what's funny is, I bet a lot of you who didn't understand nodes just a few minutes ago are starting to see like, oh dang, this is really, really powerful. Because if I want, if I'm in a layer-based program of some kind, and I want, okay, let's say, check this out. This is so crazy. This is where it gets so much fun. So let's say I want this text, and let's see, we'll put the text over over this red background, and we'll go, okay, I like this text, but I want it to, I want to have a copy of the text. Normally, what you would do with layer-based program is you would duplicate the layer, and you would offset it or something like that. So you'd have two separate text layers, okay? But what we can do is we can just do something like take a transform, run this text through a transform, and we'll just look at this on the left, and we're going to put this down a little bit, all right? So this transform is just taking the same text and it's pushing it down. And then we could grab another merge node, put this merge into here, and then merge this transformed text over, and now we have two versions of that text. One is offset, but it's coming from the same text, and when we adjust it, that's going to happen in both places.
That is crazy. That is crazy right now. All right, wait a minute. Before you connected it to the merge, up in the upper left, then the transform node was basically like, just like in the edit page, if we had a video clip, we could click on it, go into the upper right, hit transform, and we could change the size of the video clip, move it on the screen, make it zoom in, zoom out. Mm-hmm. So that's what that transform node is doing. But before you connected it to anything, you had it in the upper left, and it was showing you the thing that it was doing, but because you hadn't connected it to the merge yet or looked at it, the output, it was sort of doing it in a vacuum. It was just saying, okay, this is what it will do. And then the minute you merged it back into, you merged the text back into itself.
Yep.
That's crazy. All right, let me ask. Okay, I got to ask a question now. Because you were doing like showing us that you could stack masks on top of masks. So that makes me want to wonder how far can you go with that? Because you're showing us like circles, a red color, and masking. Can you mask a mask? Like, could you? If I said, "Hey, Casey, I saw you take red, and then you were able to mask it into a circle, and I saw you make a second mask in there, connected it. You had 2 red circles.
Yeah.
Could you mask the mask and make like a moon shape?
Absolutely.
How would you do that?
So you can take a mask. So let's grab this one. So this is just an ellipse. And when you run a mask through another mask, this second mask, this controls how the masks interact. Okay. So let's just to make things a little bit easier, let's grab a rectangle. Okay. So this rectangle mask, by default, they're going to add together, okay, which means that they're going to combine. But in this second node, there's this thing called paint mode, all right? It's not really called the right thing. It's not that, but it's not that obvious, okay? Paint mode is merge. And so this is sort of acting like a merge node where it's just putting these together. You can also switch this to add, and it's going to be exactly the same thing. And what that's doing is image math, which we could get into if you want. But basically, it's taking these shapes and it's adding them together. And this shape plus this shape means they're combined. Okay. We could switch this to subtract. And that's going to take this first shape, this ellipse, and it's going to remove the second shape from it. And so that's how you get these kind of more advanced masks where you have one mask cutting out another mask to make these different shapes. You could also run this through another mask. Let's take this through an ellipse, right? So this has another mask, and what this is doing is adding them together. But I could also subtract this one. And so now I'm getting all these kind of fancy things just by combining these masks in the right order. Pretty crazy.
This is nuts. Like, it's the versatility of these things.
Yeah.
Even though realistically you've kind of made it simple. You're like, there's 4 different types of nodes out here. There are image nodes, there are effects nodes, there are masks, and there are merge nodes. But when you start putting them together in different ways, it gives us so much more functionality than like playing around on just stacking layers up like I'm used to in the edit page.
Yeah.
I got a bunch of questions. You mind if I throw a couple of questions up here?
Of course,
Casey?
yeah.
All
Let's do
right,
it.
so let me go in here. One of the questions was a great question. Are we taking questions? And the answer is yes. Look at that. I already solved the problem already. We are taking questions. One answered.
Good work.
Here's a question. Ken Stout Live asks, can the individual masks be keyframed for movement?
Sure. Yeah, we haven't got into keyframing yet, but it's actually really simple. It works a lot like it does in the edit page. It actually is slightly better than the edit page. So we have our playhead here, which is a little bit hard to see on the recording, but it's this little red line. And we can go to whatever frame we want. So I'll just start at frame 0.
So that, just to be clear, that's the timeline. Those little hash marks with numbers there, that's actually like our timeline right there.
Yep. It's the timeline for the clip. Yes.
Gotcha.
So I'll go to whatever frame I want to set a keyframe on. Keyframe is just a way to set a property at a certain time. Okay, so let's say at frame 0, I want this rectangle to be right here. I'm just going to move it to where I want it. And then I got to find the property that actually that I want to animate. So this, in this case, would be center. I know that because as I move this around, I can see this little this little number move around when I move it. So I know that's the one I want to keyframe. So to keyframe it, all I do is hit this little diamond right here. And this works the same way pretty much throughout Resolve. Okay, so right there at frame 0, I want this center to be 0.5, 0.014, blah, 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 right? Now I move a different place in time. So let's move to the end of the comp. And then I can move this either with my widget here, or I can grab this Y and kind of move this up like this. And now this is going to animate from there to there across the clip. Okay, everything inside of Fusion can be keyframed. Pretty much everything. So I can animate all of my masks. Sure, I could do this same thing. Here's the center here, and I didn't really set that right, but whatever. We'll just move this down. So I can have these both going at different speeds. I can have this one doing different things. I can start it over here, right? And animate all of these all separately. I could animate the different properties of it. I can make one, oh, I didn't actually keyframe that. I could make one be soft at the beginning and harden the edge at the end. I mean, I can adjust the strength and the opacity of them. I can adjust the angle and all kinds of stuff for every single part of every single node.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question. You added keyframes. You put them into the type. I can see that they're in there somewhere. Little white lines have now been added into. I can actually see them. Like there's a little white dot in the clip timeline.
Yep.
What if I wanted What if I want to change the speed of this animation, this keyframed animation? How would I do that?
So this is where we're going to get out of our comfort zone a little bit. And there are other panels, just like the rest of Resolve, there are more panels that we can open up with these buttons up here. And so there is a panel called Keyframes, and this admittedly is not the best interface. Okay, I'm gonna concede that right now. However, this is a great way to move things around in time. So what we can do is we can click this little button right here, which is called Zoom to Fit. Click this Zoom to Fit button. I'll move my screen over too. And this shows all of the animation for our composition. Now there are a lot of nodes that don't really have animation here. So what I could do is I could go to this sort menu and just click on animated, and that's going to show me just the animated properties. I can twirl these down and I can see these little white tick marks here. These are the keyframes. And so I can move these back and forth in time and adjust the timing of these animations. And so I can make them faster, slower, and just kind of move them back and forth this way. And that's going to change the speed. The other thing I can do with keyframes is, let's say I want, let's do something that's a little bit more practical here. Bloop, bloop, bloop. So I have this text, and let's say I want this text to fly in. All right, so at 24 frames or 34 frames or whatever, I want this to show up here. I'm going to keyframe this center property, and then I'm going to bring this down here at the beginning of it. So this starts off screen, and then I play it, and it comes in like this. So I can adjust the speed here with the keyframes panel, but I can also close this keyframes panel and open up the spline panel, and this is sort of a similar thing. This is actually, if I click on the property that I want to adjust and hit Zoom to Fit, that gives me a graph of this animation. And so I can take this graph and I can adjust the keyframes and adjust the handles on here, adjust this curve, and that's going to adjust the speed and the kind of just how the keyframes animate. And so I can have this slow down before it stops. I can ease the keyframes, right? And so that's how you have a lot of control over your keyframes and your animation and stuff in Fusion, both in the speed in the keyframes editor, as well as how those are interpolated, how they slow down or speed up, related to the keyframes here in the spline panel.
One quick question about that when you said easing. I know that it's a question that's come up a lot in the community. When you look at, like, you have this spline open, right, and it has now kind of a little bit of a hump to it.
Yeah.
Now I know that in general, when you add two keyframes, like you said, start here and then end up here later on, and in general, what's going to happen in Resolve is it's just going to, the minute it hits the first keyframe and it knows it needs to move, it's like there is no 0 to 60 like a car. It's 60, and it goes 60 until it gets to the next keyframe and then comes to a dead stop. Sure. Right? Like that's how that straight line. So when you're putting this curve on, is that what we're doing? Is instead of going like hit the gas, you're immediately at 60, and then when you get to the destination, you immediately stop. It's allowing that motion to slow down a bit.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
You could think about, I like to think about driving a car up a hill, right? So if you want to, let's just reset that. So if you want to drive your Jeep up this hill, and let's make this a little bit more intense here. So let's Okay, so let's say that we had a hill that looked like this. You don't really want to drive your Jeep up this hill because it's going to like, you know, bash your tires as you go up here. And then you might even like bottom out right here, right? You don't want that. And so generally when you're animating things, you want a nice smooth curve. You want a nice smooth hill to drive your Jeep up, right? Because look what happens with this animation. As I play this back, it just kind of comes in and goes, and it just stops immediately. It just doesn't look that refined, okay? It looks cheap. So instead of having this sharp transition here, we can do a little fancy thing. You can hit Shift L, or no, F. You can hit F on the keyboard for flatten. That's going to take this little handle and it's going to flatten it like this. And what that effectively does is it smooths out the hill. Same thing here, F for flatten. And now this is the kind of thing you want to drive your car up, right? It's nice and smooth. It isn't going to be any problems. And then look at the animation. This comes in and it just feels so much better. Comes in and it slows down before it stops. It feels natural, right? So you always want those smooth hills with your keyframes.
Now, in this window, Casey, before when you were showing us the keyframes window, you pulled the keyframes apart and moved them around. Mm-hmm. I think most of us know here who have keyframed, the closer two keyframes are together, the faster they're going to do whatever they're telling any particular asset or feature or numerical value to do more quickly. If we're in the spline menu, can we pull keyframes apart? Can we slow down things from there too?
Yes, you can. It's slightly more awkward. So I can grab this, and actually this is working fine. So this...
Oh, I can see it's doing it also in the keyframe window.
Yeah,
I can see
it pushes
them
it that way. And what's crazy is in the keyframes panel, you can actually select these and hit F as well to flatten. And so you can do a little bit of that. So like keyframes is really good for speed, and you can kind of ease it. And spline is really good for easing, and you can kind of do speed.
Got it.
It's sort of two tools for it, but they can both sort of do the other thing too. Yeah.
All right, let me ask you a question now here, because this is now you've shown us a bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. We've seen some text, we've seen some color, we've seen some mask. You now know the 4 types of nodes that are out there. You've shown how they can interact. You've shown us the inputs and outputs of the nodes and what to pay attention to for foreground, background, masking input. This makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
But what if I want to do something like, hey, I've got a video clip or an image and I have some text like a word or my name, and I want to do something crazy and make my text mask out my video, and so that you're seeing the letters, but the video is only playing inside the shape of the letters. Can I use, let me phrase this because you were using things in a different way. Can I use a text node, which we originally categorized as an image node, as a mask to mask out my other image node, which is a video clip?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do I do something like that?
So what's great about this is that, here, let me get my, there we go. What's great about this is you kind of already know the answer. If you've been paying attention and like this stuff is starting to sink in, you kind of already know the answer. Because, okay, think about this. Like let's just grab an image just because it's a little easier than the video. But this works the same for the video, okay? And grab this image and go into Fusion, okay? We can think about this in, okay, what are we actually wanting to do? We're wanting there to be text, but us to only see this image within the text. And think about how you're saying that. I only want to see the image within the text. That sounds a lot like a mask. Please make this image only right here, right? So let's grab some text, and we'll just bring this up on the left viewer, and we'll just say some text, okay? And I'll adjust some stuff here, make it nice, okay? We can just use this text as a mask. Look at that. Because again, we don't need to have a mask to connect to the mask. We can connect anything to anything. It just depends on if it likes it or not, right? We can connect this text to the mask, and the reason it's going to work is because this text, this text node is making an image with transparency. This media in, this is when we connect something to the mask, it's looking for an image with transparency. So it works out. So it's going to apply that transparency to this image. It's only going to draw that image to the screen within that transparency that's connected to the mask input. So that's how we can use basically anything as a mask that has transparency. You can even do it with other channels and everything, which we can get into if you want to. But that's pretty much how you would do that. And now we have this text within, or we have this image within the text.
Because
So
I
that's
know
probably
I've
the
seen like
easiest way to do it.
some move. I can't watch movies like a normal human being anymore. Casey. I
Yeah.
don't know if you have this
Oh,
same
yes.
problem. Like, I stare at what was the camera angle? Was it an L cut, a J cut? What are they
Sure.
doing? Like how are they framing the shot? What's the color correction?
Yeah, it's
are they
completely
using
ruined everything.
I pay.
Yep.
It's like what I don't know what happened in the story. I was busy looking at the cuts.
Sure.
But you'll see like movies where like they'll start the beginning of the movie and it'll be like the name of the movie will come and there'll be stuff happening. And we've seen it happen in like Marvel intros where the word Marvel, there's like the guys fighting the characters, the superheroes are in the letters.
Yep.
And that's really it. It's using the word Marvel or whatever the case may be for the movie to mask out the video footage.
Exactly. Yep.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yep.
I've got a bunch of questions. I have to make sure.
Let's do it.
I want to see some of these. Wait a minute, right off the bat. I love how Daniel's asking like a lawyer, driving
Yeah.
the detail for which he already knows the answer. Listen, I plead the fifth on that. Right? Here, this is what I've talked about on the channel, looping keyframes. Like if
Sure.
you take something, if you create two keyframes and you go, okay, I had my mask do whatever motion. Can you loop that and can you make that sort of create a loop and keep doing that motion repeatedly?
Absolutely.
How would I
Yeah,
do
let me show
something
you.
like that?
Let me show you. So let's make a keyframe here. Let's do the same thing. Let's just animate this text, and we're going to. Sure, let's do that. Okay. Actually, let's have this come off the side like that. So our original animation is just going to be the text going from one side to the other. Okay. But after this, it doesn't do anything. It just hangs out over here. So what we can do is we can go to something like the spline panel, and we can open up what's animated here, and we can select, just like box select, both of these keyframes like this.
Okay, when you say box select, what did you just do there?
Click and drag in the empty space.
So you left click, held down the left click, and literally drew a box around both keyframes.
Yep, just like this, just like you would select a bunch of stuff in any window. Yep,
Gotcha.
like that. You could also shift select them, but box select seems to work really well for me. So you could do that, and then just right click on any of these keyframes with them selected, and you get all these options. Gosh, you get so much stuff. One of them is set loop. And so you can set loop and set that to loop. And what that'll do, we can see in the graph here actually, is it loops that. I don't know if you can quite see that.
Yeah, it's a little purple on dark gray is
Yep.
the best color combinations.
Yeah.
Black Magic Design. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so it loops it over and over again. And so what we get is this text going from left to right over and over again forever. So that's going to loop that forever.
How long will it go? What defines how long the loop lasts?
It goes as long. It will go forever as long as your composition is.
So back on the.
Hello. I can't hear you. I don't know if that's.
My bad. I'm sitting here talking to myself. So if I went back to the edit page and had like a clip that was X amount long, like this is an image, you can stretch an image as long as you want. So if you just keep stretching the image out, it's going to just keep looping as long as the image is in the timeline?
Yep, as long as that is in the timeline. So we'll just put this over the image so we can actually see it. But yeah, that's going to just keep looping for as long as we want.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about that is you don't have to keyframe it. You just keyframe it once and then loop it. So that's great for things like, backgrounds that you want, have some animation that's repeating forever, something like that.
That's very cool. That's very cool. All right, is there anything else that in the basic node structure that I need to be aware of? Because listen, I started this conversation by telling people I had linked your most recent video down in the description. And when I tell you the difference between what we're talking about here today, sort of just getting your toes in the water, and what you were talking about in your latest video, I think that's something at least you have to mention, because when we're talking about different types of nodes, you did say there's image, there is effects, there are merge nodes that put things into layers, one on top of each other, and then we have masks.
Yep.
But there is a spatial thing that happens in Fusion, where you and I right now are on YouTube. We are in 2 dimensions. We're
Yep.
vertical and width, unless you look at me sideways. We're 2-dimensional. But in Fusion, there's a whole nother section that deals with 3-dimensional space.
Yep.
Dude, what the hell is going on there? And how on earth are we supposed to wrap our heads around that?
Okay, so I'm about to reveal the Matrix to you, right? And you're going to
Blue
realize
pill.
you know Kung Fu, okay? So check this out. This is what's wild, all right? This is why I love this kind of approach of the 4 nodes, all right? So, yes, we've been dealing with 2D stuff, and that, it takes some getting used to, but it's okay. There's 4 nodes. Let's go to the other spectrum, the insanity of 3D.
Go
right?
crazy. Everyone put their safety belts on. We're going deep.
So we have a shape 3D. We can make something like a cube and actually make it in 3D, and then we can kind of go around it. And we actually have we're working in real 3D space here in Fusion. Okay. Let's say we want to animate that. Okay, so we could do something like let's do like a transform 3D. We could take this and we can rotate it, let's say, and then we could kind of put this into a 3D world and put some lights on it and make a renderer. I'm intentionally going really fast here because I'm going to show you something about this that's pretty
Go for it.
interesting. Okay.
Everybody keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle for the moment.
Let's actually make this a directional light. We're going to put this here. And, so here's 3D stuff, and we can animate this 3D box and everything, and it's crazy, right? So I just added a whole bunch of nodes that are 3D nodes, and you go, oh, well, I don't know how to deal with any of that. Check this out. Shape 3D. What this does is this makes a basic 3D shape. So this makes a starting point. It generates something that didn't exist before. It's kind of the raw material, much like an image, right? So this is the basic building block, all right? So this is essentially an image node. It's just in 3D space. Then we're running it through a transform. You see what we're doing here? This is an effect in 3D. Then we have a light, which is, I guess, a little bit different. But it's sort of like an image. It's almost like an effect that doesn't need an image. But it's essentially something that's going to affect something else. And then we put that into a merge 3D, which is a lot like a merge, right? And so these things work very, very similarly to the nodes that we've already learned. Renderer 3D is sort of like a media out, but for the 3D world. What this does is this turns 3D world into 2D world. And so it's almost like your one dream deeper into the inception, right? To where you have 3D world, which isn't really an image, it's just a 3D world. We turn that into a 2D world, and now we can take this 2D image, and then this is an image node now. And then we can do our compositing and everything just like this. But essentially, the same kind of things are, we have a raw building block, sort of like an image node. That's a shape 3D. We have an effect node, something that affects one of those building blocks. We have a merge that puts things together. We have a renderer that renders an image. It's all stuff that we know. Even though it's a little more complicated, there are some things to learn. I'm not trying to totally oversimplify it, but you actually know a lot more about this than you think you do. All right? Same kind of thing. Okay, with particles. Guys, you can do these particle simulations inside of Fusion. And guess what? Same kind of thing. We have a particle emitter, which makes particles. It's the raw ingredients. And we have a renderer, which makes the image of those raw ingredients. Okay? We have effects like turbulence, where we run that image through an effect. We run those particles, those raw particles, through a particle effect. It's very similar, right? We have something called particle merge. Is this sounding familiar? Same thing with USD nodes. It's a raw building block. It's merges. It's effects. It's rendering 2D stuff. All of that is very, very similar. Now, there are even things sort of like masks within that. But really, it's interesting because even though it's more complicated and it's actually 50% more dimensions, it's not like totally out of the realm of things that we've learned so far. It's that, but like with a little tweak. It's like a different flavor of all the stuff that we've been learning, and everything that we've been doing here with these images, effects, merges, masks, all of that translates into the really complicated stuff. Like anything that you see, so like, let's just open up a finished comp here. So this is a comp that has to do with visual effects, and let's see if it's actually working here. Yeah, so this is adding a muzzle flash to a gun, right? So this is visual effects, and we look back, and it's not terribly complicated, but what's crazy is now that we know kind of the language here, you can take even a more advanced kind of thing. This isn't really that advanced, but somewhat more advanced. And you can say, okay, media in, that's an image. Planar tracker, that's being run through that. That's actually kind of an effect. Then we have another image. We're doing some brightness and contrast to it. That's an effect. Transform, that's an effect. And then that is being merged on top of this. That's why it looks like that. Again, we have our smoke. We're transforming that. We're transforming it again. We're doing a blur on it, and then we're putting it over. We have a mask. This is masking an effect called directional blur. And what that's doing is blurring this little piece right here so that it blurs that little piece of the gun. But we're only blurring it within this mask right here. We have these masks. This is the lighting. So we have two masks there that are masking this color corrector. And what this color corrector does is just brightens part of the image. But it's only doing that within these masks. We have a background here. This has some paint on it. So this is just a little extra little thing that, so this is a black background, and then we have an effect where you can paint on it. Okay, so this is just making this orange streak, and that is being merged on top of our image, and we're using fast noise, which is just clouds, and we're using the transparency of that as a mask. We're putting this into the merge, and we're only, I think probably, we don't quite see it, but we would only be putting that over wherever these clouds are. All right, and so if we put this over black, let's say, should be able to see it. Maybe we won't. Maybe I messed something up. Very, very possible. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look at that. But anyway, so all of these things are just the exact same things we've been talking about, and look at the cool stuff that you can do just knowing this. It's just masks, effects, merges, and images. That's all it is.
So this entire thing we're looking at here, this node tree, which I got to be honest with you, I mean, if you haven't really played around with Fusion, it's like you see that and you go, how the hell did you even know to, like, there's so many pieces. It's like looking at a 1,000-piece puzzle with no picture of like what the final thing's supposed to be. But as you break it down and I work, and it's kind of like, I feel like you work kind of left to right. And I don't know if that's usually true, but I feel like when I look at you building stuff, I immediately, my head goes to the left and I go, what's the first thing all the way to the left? That must
Yeah.
have been the original video clip. And
Yep.
then I can see all these other things that are stacked are just things you're adding on top. Piece of footage that was a person shooting a gun. It didn't really fire a gun. I don't know what goes on on the weekends with you and the family. Maybe anything can happen, right? But you wanted to add in this really realistic muzzle flash, like a gun was really being fired. So you added flash. That's a whole stack. In there, you were adding smoke, because if a gun gets fired, it's not going to just be flash, it's going to be smoke. The way, then with those things, you wanted to actually have little effects to make it more realistic to blend. So you're blurring certain parts of it. You were adding different pieces in there, all to end up going out on the right as the final output, that'll end up on your timeline, right?
Yep, exactly. Yep, it's all those pieces going together, and it does seem overwhelming looking at it like this, but really you take it in pieces, right? You build it as you go. And so, you're starting out with just this basic piece of footage and you go, okay, what do I not like about this? What needs to happen? It's like, well, we need a big old muzzle flash there, because if he's shooting, I mean, it's got to be cool. So, you think about it like that. It's like, well, I would need some kind of image to use for this. And so you'd go into your assets and hopefully you would have some kind of asset like this muzzle flash. And you go, okay, well, so far, here, I'll just take this over. So far, I need to put this muzzle flash, let's just say flash. I need to put this flash over this. Okay, so that means I merge it. Okay, so I can take a merge and put this in like this. Great. And now I have the flash over it. Oh no, there's a problem. Okay, that's what it is. It's like, what needs to happen next? You do it. Oh no, there's a problem. And then you fix the problem. Okay, one problem is, well, we can't see through this. If we select this merge and we go to apply mode, this is like a transparency mode in your edit page or in Photoshop or whatever. We can switch this to something like screen, and that's going to get rid of the black. Okay, so that's one way to fix it. Now what's the problem? Well, the problem is that the flash is over everything and it's not where it should be, where the gun is. Okay, so what do we do? Well, we need to move the flash around. So we can run this through a transform. Okay, let's put a transform here. That will let us change the angle and the size and the position of this, and we can move this to where it's supposed to be. Okay, cool. Let's make this a little bigger and flashier. Okay, great. Awesome. Now what's the problem? Well, maybe it's not bright enough. Okay, well, how do we brighten this? Do we want to brighten everything, or do we just want to brighten the flash? Well, I just want to brighten the flash. Okay, so let's put an effect after the flash, maybe like a brightness and contrast. Okay, cool. I'll put this here and push up the gain, and there we have a brighter flash. Okay, that's great. Anyway, that's how you build it, is you go through it in every little step like that, and you just think about, what should I do next? And then you just take it one node at a time.
So is there, like, when you go to start a project, Casey, when you're looking at something, do you already know like how many nodes you're going to end up with when you're do you have a mental image of what the thing's going to look like, or is it really more a matter of kind of like, cooking? You have a basic idea of your grocery list of knowing what you'll need, but you're not really thinking. You're thinking one step at a time. Like if you're making pizza, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to grab like the yeast and the water and the flour, and you go, let me make that first and set that aside. That's that portion, right? And then I'm going to slowly add, like, do the other parts. I'm going to make a sauce. I'm going to cook some, some sausage to put on, and maybe, whatever. So it's really just adding these things in piece by piece, and you end up with the final pizza.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot like video editing, right? I mean, it's like you don't necessarily know how many cuts are going to be in. You might have a rough idea of the story. It's like, I'd have a rough idea. It's like, okay, I want to add the muzzle flash, and I probably am going to add some lighting and some kind of smoke. But it's like, once you get in there, you add the smoke and you realize the smoke's too bright or too dark. And then you're like, oh, well, I didn't plan on adding a brightness and contrast, but I'm going to do it now. And that's kind of that's how you take it, and it's okay. I would say the more experienced you get compositing, the more you can sort of plan for that, the more you kind of like expect, okay, well, I'm probably going to need these couple assets or whatever, but you really don't know until you get in there, because there's little problems that come up, and that's okay.
Yeah, man, this conversation could go on forever. I feel like I feel like Fusion is a never-ending well of possibilities, and you're only really limited by, your imagination. Like, well, what do you want to build? Like,
Yep.
I'm being such a noob. I have no, I mean, I know what I don't know. I know what I don't know. And to me, it's been really fun doing things like you showed us some really quickly touched on some 3D stuff, and it's been fun going, well, what does my brain think? Like, well, what do I know that's 2D? Like, I know text is 2D usually when I layer it onto, in the edit page. Yeah. Can I make my text 3D? Can I make it more three-dimensional? Mm-hmm. And you can do that stuff in Fusion. It's like the barn doors are open, and now you can start dealing with, anything that your brain can think up. There's probably some node in there, or combination of nodes that could make that happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's so much fun.
All right, so listen, cool. I have dominated your time here, and I really appreciate you coming by and just sort of opening up Fusion and making a little more understandable. I love that you broke that down to basically 4 types of nodes. I like that you kind of broke down the idea of why we're dealing with 2 screens and how to put things up into 2 different preview windows. It makes a lot of sense when I see it, and how things connect and why the nodes are built the way they are and what they have for inputs and outputs. When I see someone like you do it, I'm like, oh, it doesn't look so hard.
Yeah.
Then we go out of this live stream, and I'm back in there crying,
Yeah.
It's a glass of whiskey, just staring at it going, damn it.
Sure.
I thought I had confidence. But is there any kind of one singular piece of advice you would give to people here in the chat, people who are watching in the replay, when it comes to getting into Fusion? Is it just to kind of get in there and just get started and feel your way around and find a comfort level, or what do you think?
I think the biggest thing is to open up Fusion and just start playing with the nodes. And you work on stupid projects. Work on projects that aren't even worth showing anybody, because that's how you really, really learn. Is open up a background and put a text over it. Play with masks, like that kind of foundational, boring stuff. It's the basics. It's the fundamentals, right? It's like when you're learning to draw, you draw circles. It's that. I wish it were sexier than that. But that's really, 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 that's how I got comfortable with Fusion. Is I'd open it up every day and just do stupid stuff. Go out and shoot something with your phone and try and put a spaceship in the sky. And you'll quickly realize how hard it is to do that. And then you'll realize all the little pieces that you don't know. You're like, okay, cool. I put it in the sky. Well, how do I position it? I don't know. How do I make it move along with the footage? I don't know. How do I put it behind the trees in the sky? I don't know. And then it's like, each one of those little things, you just go down that rabbit hole and be like, okay, well, how do I remove a sky? How do I track something so that it stays along with the footage? How do I match the colors so that the colors don't look totally crazy? And then you take it one little step at a time. And the more you do that, the more you'll realize, like, oh yeah, 6 months ago when I was putting that spaceship in the sky, I learned to color correct a little bit. And so I'm going to use that same thing that I learned working on that project I'm never going to show anybody for this project that I'm working on for my client. And that's it. It's playing around and being willing to go in and fail and try stuff that's just a little bit hard for you. If it's way too hard, if it's crazy, that can be frustrating, right? You'll probably learn, but it can be so frustrating that you quit, and that's too hard. So it needs to be hard enough to where you don't quite know, but it's still exciting.
there's an analogy that I use with people, just because with me everything's music. I just can't seem to get away from it. And I was a professional guitar player for years. I used to tour and have major label deals and do that thing and work in studios. Yeah. And, and I am no spring chicken. So when I was growing up, I remember Eddie Van Halen and Van Halen first coming on the scene. And there were people like me who learned to play guitar from the classics, the standards, and learned blues and rock and all of the fundamentals. And then there was like a new wave of people who learned to play guitar by tapping on a fretboard. Yeah. And it was very impressive when they did that in a bubble, but when you put them with a band, they had no idea how to play with a band.
Sure.
Are there any bad habits that you is any of that true? Or in Fusion, is there Are there any, like, is there a course that we should, I know I have, speaking of courses, I do have linked in the description. You do have courses for a lot of the Fusion training that is down there. If anyone's interested in getting more of Casey, I've got a link to his channel. You can go down and subscribe. I've got links to his most recent video, which is awesome. It rips open Fusion in 3 dimensions, which is amazing. He's got his courses down there. But are there any pitfalls? Because you were saying, like, sometimes you try things that are too hard. Is there any recommendation, like, should we maybe not be discouraged if we can't be Van Halen the first time we pick up a guitar?
Yeah, I would say, I wouldn't say there's like a lot of pitfalls, because the thing with nodes is you could always just like delete a little part of it and then just kind of go back to where you were. Whereas like layers tend to stack on each other and be dependent on each other more than nodes are. And so really, like, you can't get too far down the rabbit hole and get in too much trouble playing around. But the more that you play around, the more you're going to have those skills to figure out what the heck is wrong. Because there's nothing worse than having, a huge amount of nodes and have this really complicated thing, and you don't understand some fundamental thing that's making everything break, right?
Right, yeah. Well, that's what I worry about. I worry about not having a good fundamental knowledge so that when I want to apply what I've learned to something in a completely different scenario, I'm a huge fan of learning that way. Like, yeah, cool. Like, put a spaceship in the sky, but I'll even have tutorials on my own channel that'll be something like, put a spaceship in the sky. But I'm not doing it because I want you to learn how to put a spaceship in the sky. I'm doing it because I want you to learn what it takes to find the features that would allow that to happen. Because those same features might allow you to do something completely different. But if you know and go, oh, I learned how to create layers and nodes and connect them and mask things out, you might be in a completely different scenario or workflow where you go, I learned how to do that while figuring out from Casey how to put a spaceship in the sky. I'm not putting a spaceship in the sky today, but I learned those techniques and those functions along the way.
Yeah. The value of doing those more complicated, impressive things is that it's a fun way to learn what fundamentals you need to brush up on.
Yeah,
that's the big thing.
You find out really quickly what you don't know.
In the courses and with our students and everything, I do a lot of throwing them to the wolves, and I just come out and say it like, hey, I'm going to give you something that's too hard right now, and you're going to fail at it. But the reason I'm doing it is because you're going to discover what you don't know, and then you can go back and study. All right. It's not because you should know this.
Minute here. Take one final minute to talk about your courses. Like, I don't know that I've ever talked to you before or spent any time with that. You offer courses. Where are they? Where I know I have a link down below. What is that like? Is that what does that course system look like?
Yeah, so we'll be coming out with a basics course pretty soon. We've been kind of revamping a lot of our courses right now. Right now, we have a Fusion 0 to Hero course, which is basically the basics through advanced. And so it's kind of like the big course that you can get, and you can start it as a beginner, and then it will take you all the way to doing pretty crazy, really cool 3D stuff. It is a lot of content. It is a lot of money. It's an investment. But if you're really wanting to dive into Fusion, that's the best way to do it. Now's a really good time to buy it, because we're going to be updating it and basically changing how the course works, but you're going to get a ton of really advanced stuff, and you're going to get basic stuff. So that's like the best way to do it right now. However, we are going to be coming out with a cheaper basics course here in the next month or two. So if you're just wanting to get into Fusion and get the basics and get to the point where you can comfortably use Fusion, that's going to be coming out soon. We also have specific courses on motion graphics as well as visual effects. And we also just released our practice projects, which is a fantastic way. There's 10 really impressive, really fun projects that you can work through that are meant to build your skills in Fusion. It's probably good to have a good handle on the basics before you jump into that. Those are more intermediate. But yeah, if you were going to start something right now, if you really want to invest, Fusion 0 to Hero is the way to go. If you're wanting more of a budget option, yeah, wait a few weeks and get our Intro to Fusion course.
Is that all at the groundcontrol.film website?
Groundcontrol.film. Yep.
All right. Perfect. I'm going to put that into the chat. Groundcontrol.film. You can click on that link. You can go check out his courses. I've got that down in the description, and I'll put some of these links in the pinned comment when we put the replay back up so you can find them as well. Casey, thank you so much for coming here and helping us
so much fun.
with our Fusion confusion.
I love talking about this stuff. I do it all day, so that's awesome.
Man. All right. Well, I hope that once we get our feet grounded and Daniel is a little bit less of a noob, maybe we could get you back and we could do a little deeper dive into some of the heavier lifting of Fusion.
Anytime you want. I mean, probably about a year from now, I would say.
Yeah, well, that's my, my
Got
calendar
him.
works
Got
on
him.
a yearly basis. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hanging out. Ladies and gentlemen, Casey Faris.
Casey Faris.
Can't believe you did the
King
jingle.
of the Fusion page.
Wow.
Just
Thanks.
miraculous. Everybody, thank you.
good.
Thank you for hanging out. Thanks for the great questions. Thank you, Casey Faris. Check him out right online. Links down below. We'll talk to you all soon. Peace.
Thank you, guys.